The term megalithic actually it means big stone. That's what it means. But what we're going to look at is we're going to see ancient structures that predate the known cultures. So for example, we start in Peru. You're going to see sites that the Inca could not have constructed because they did not have the technology involved. They were a Bronze Age culture. The basic lesson is the tool has to be harder than the material. So if you're a Bronze Age culture, that means out of the most hardest natural material we know is diamond. That's 10. Copper is 3. Bronze is 3.5. So granite is 7. So you can't use bronze tools to cut granite or basalt because it's a lot harder than the tool. So that's the basic principle. So we're going to see clear examples of advanced machining technology, and in some cases, technology more advanced than what we have in the 21st century, as hard as that is to believe. So the basic idea of this talk is based on this book I wrote called Aftershock, and it's about evidence of an ancient cataclysm that erased human history. And the important dates to think of are 12,800 to 11,600 years ago. That's called the Younger Dryas. And during that time period, the world was put into a complete state of cataclysm. There were all sorts of events that happened over the course of 1,200 years that wreaked havoc all over the planet. So most people think that civilization started about 6,000 years ago, but you're going to see it goes way farther back than that. So these are some of the books that I've written: Lost Ancient Technology of Peru and Bolivia. They're all available on Amazon. And then Lost Ancient Technology of Egypt, Lost Ancient Technology of Peru and Bolivia, Volume 2. This is an example of a megalithic site located in the highlands of Peru. You can see the size of the slabs. And the Inca could not have cut stone that well. So this is an example of a megalithic site. We'll also see, as I said, damage by cataclysm. So you can see the pieces that are broken like that. So that's an example of a very ancient site that was damaged by some kind of cataclysm. And then Lost Ancient Technology of Egypt, Volume 2. And even in Mexico, there's some sites in Mexico that are far older than what most archaeologists state. And that's the case of all the places we're going to be looking at. They're far older than acknowledged by standard academics because they live in a paradigm that is rapidly dying off. The younger archaeologists in Peru and also in Egypt, they watch YouTube. So they can see, and you're going to see it's not that difficult to see the difference between what these cultures could have done and what they inherited. They inherited ancient sites, adapted them, and repurposed them for what they wanted to do. And then Puma, Punku, and Tiwanaku, which is probably the most mysterious site on the planet in Bolivia. Baalbek in Lebanon. That stone there is 1,200 tons. So the first place we're going to visit is the famous Machu Picchu. And what you can see is you see two different forms of construction. The above half is relatively simple, so that's Inca, and that's on top of a much more tight-fitting construction. Some people could say, well, maybe that foundation was done by the Inca and made really strong to hold up the rest of the construction. That's possible, but I don't think so. But this is an example of what the Inca maybe were able to do, but then contrast that with this. Now this site, which is at Machu Picchu, this has never been repaired in recent times. So when the Inca abandoned Machu Picchu in about 1535, that's how they left it. So you can see obviously the construction on top is very crude, and then below that you have the megalithic. Also, all of the walls at this site and other sites in Peru from east to west, they were pulled apart by a giant earthquake, which is what you can see here. The north-south walls didn't move, but the east-west ones did. That obviously caused the upper part to collapse. Then the Inca find the site, maybe around 1400 AD, and build on top of it. Now, we've all heard of the flood, but there are more than 200 indigenous cultures that talk about a massive flood and the destruction of the world that they knew. So that may have been an island, that may have been a continent, depends on how big the civilization was. But clear evidence, again, between 12,800 and 11,600 years ago. It wasn't like one event. It was like a waves of events that happened. Sometimes earthquakes, sometimes eruptions of volcanoes, comets entering the solar system, asteroids entering the solar system, ejection of plasma from galactic center, etc. So here's one of the theories is that a comet came in to our solar system and broke apart and wreaked havoc on our solar system. That's why Venus is rotating backwards, Uranus is rotating like this, and our planet is at 23.5 degrees. In a perfect universe, everything would be perfectly vertical. So obviously something came in and created major damage and also depopulating large sections of the earth at different times. This, of course, is Plato. And Plato is the one, of course, most famous for the theory of Atlantis. But he got his knowledge passed down from his ancestor called Solon. And Solon had a theory that there was an ancient cataclysm somewhere around 13,000 years ago. And so he went to Egypt and he met with the priesthood and he asked them questions about that. Was there a massive cataclysm, say around 13,000 years ago? And he said, the priest said, you Greeks don't even know your own history. It wasn't one cataclysm, it's every 13,000 years, which is half of a precessional cycle. Because the precession of the equinox is a natural phenomenon that takes place over 26,000 years. So every 13,000 years, there's a major cataclysm that occurs on the planet, wreaking havoc. Then we have what are called the megafauna. So this, for example, is a woolly mammoth. And we know that the mammoths and also all the other megafauna, like the saber-toothed cat, etc., died off between 12,800 and 11,600 years ago. Most of the mammoths they find now are in the permafrost, and as they excavate and find them, they found thousands of them, and a lot of them, their legs are broken. So that sounds like they were catapulted or something happened to the planet. The planet was suddenly shifted from one position to another position, maybe from vertical to 23.5 degrees, or maybe there's some theories that over the last 200,000 years ago, the pole has shifted 5 times, very rapidly. Also, when they've done autopsies, they find that they still have fresh buttercups and other flowers in their stomachs. So that's a flash freeze, flash movement of the pole. So this is what I'm talking about. There, again, we're at 23.5 degrees. Why are we not perfectly vertical? Something has disturbed the axis of the planet. And here are some of the megafauna. Now, most archaeologists, and again, I don't like to bash standard archaeology, but they get so many things wrong, and they're so narrow in their perception of things. The problem with academics is that the students tend to learn directly from their professor, who learned from his or her professor, with an unbroken chain of inadequate information. So they blame the Native Americans crossing over the Bering Land Bridge of killing off millions of the megafauna over the course of 1,000 years, which is highly unlikely. And look at the size of these animals compared to the little humans. So clearly something major happened, or a series of events. Also, a very great book written in the 1950s called Cataclysm, Compelling Evidence of a Cosmic Catastrophe. Again, around the same time frame, 11,000, according to them, 11,500 years ago, which caused major destruction. Again, their belief is that a comet entered the solar system and wreaked havoc. And then their work was adopted by Barbara Han-Clough, who is an astrologer, and she came up with a concept called Catastrophobia, that when all of these events were happening, that's what caused people to go from the open area into caves. That's where the caveman time period began. It was because of these major awful events that happened that caused the survivors to have to seek shelter somewhere underground or in caves in order to survive. So probably 95% of the world's population died off because of all of this stuff. And then Dr. Paul Laviolette, who's a brilliant American physicist, his theory, again, every 13,000 years, there's a major cataclysmic event that happens. But according to him, what happens is that the center of our galaxy is a black hole. And most standard academics believe that black holes just continuously absorb energy. They absorb light, etc., and slowly gather more and more of the energy. But according to him, every 13,000 years, that black hole fills up and then erupts and releases the energy, including cosmic rays, across the galactic plane. So again, if you're going from the core of our solar system or galaxy, and if that energy is going across the galactic plane and entering our solar system, that's going to cause major disruption of the planets. Once again, why is Venus rotating backwards? And some of you may have heard of Dr. Robert Schoch. His theory is that every 13,000 years, there's an eruption of energy from our sun, that it pulses and sends shoots out waves of energy and light that go out. And about 10 years ago, there was a major eruption or EMF that came from our sun. Luckily, it went in the opposite direction of Earth. Otherwise, if it had hit us, we would not be here anymore. So that's why I took all of those theories and took the parts that I thought made a lot of sense and put them all together into my book. And again, you've heard of the concept of Atlantis. Most people think that it was existing somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean. Other people think it's actually Antarctica. Some people say, it was in the Mediterranean, et cetera, But it's probably smart to think about the city of Atlantis and not so much about a continent. And there's a site in Africa called the Eye of the Sahara, which is located about here. And some people think that it is actually where the lost city of Atlantis, or the remains of it, still exist. So that's about a 5-year-old theory so far. So this is precision. This site is called the Coricancha, located in Cusco. And you can see there's no mortar, there's no cement or anything as a filler. And the tricky thing about this is you see that little tiny raised area like that. That is probably 10 or 100 times more complicated to do than just a straight wall. So one thing that does is that if there is a big earthquake, it prevents the layers of the wall from moving back and forth. Just that little tiny bit like that. Then here we have a site called the Temple of Viracocha, and you can see 2 layers of construction. From here up to there is adobe mud, and below that is stone. And so when we get up close to it, you can see how tight-fitting it is. This is megalithic. There's also evidence, which we'll see at other locations, that on the western surfaces there's discoloration of the stone, because again, it could have been a pulse of plasma that came from the sun and struck that and caused rapid heating. And in other cases, we'll see physical damage to the structures as well. And here, this is called the Sungate, located outside of Cusco. On the right-hand side, this is Inca construction, rough stone with clay filler. And then this is the megalithic part. So you see big blocks of basalt, and then these interesting knobs that protrude out, which we'll get into to some degree. And then on top of the megalithic wall, again, is more Inca. So the Inca clearly, when they entered Cusco around 1100 AD, they found, there are two walls like that they found those two walls, and then they decided to rebuild it, and they built with their level of technology, which is this. And again, at the Coricancha in Cusco, you see this super tight fitting, no mortar. So when the Inca found this site around 1100 AD, damaged, they took the stones that had fallen on the ground like that, and they put them back into place, but they couldn't get them to fit tightly, so they used, again, clay mortar to fill in the gaps. And then when they ran out of this material, they simply found local field stone and put it in like that with more mortar. And then when the Spanish found the site, they did the upper part like that. White, because their level of craftsmanship was actually inferior to what the Inca were capable of. So they used the white to cover up their poorer workmanship. And here we have the first topographical map ever made of Cusco in the 1530s, and you can see wide walls, or thick walls and thin walls. The thick walls are what the Inca found when they discovered an abandoned, partially destroyed megalithic city. And so the thin walls are all their construction. That gives you, again, evidence that the Inca did not found Cusco, as in were founders of it. They found Cusco as a damaged site. And this is the other form of construction that we find, which is megalithic, which is called polygonal, which means multi-sided. Every stone is of a different shape and size. Now, what we do when we build things is we have a uniform size, like a brick. That way you can calculate how many bricks you need to build a wall that's 100 feet long. But whoever these people or beings were, they wanted to do it very complicated. And so every stone's a different shape and size, and all the stones interlock, so that makes it earthquake-proof. But it also means that if there is an earthquake or something, that the whole building vibrates as if it's one stone. So I think these were built for vibrational purposes. You know, that's where the term alternate or alter comes from alternate state of mind. So when you enter one of these buildings, you move into a slightly different state of energy mentally, because they're still energized from the original construction. And here, again, you see the megalithic is on the bottom, and then the Inca repair work is up on top like that. So obviously you can see what I'm talking about already, the difference between that and that. But what the Inca tried to do is because they found an abandoned city, they wanted to replicate the look, but they didn't have the technology to be able to make the stone fit perfectly from the front to the back like the ancient megalithic builders did. So you see the gap here, almost like a pie shape. So they wanted the front to look like the older stuff, but they were not capable of making it perfect from front to back like the megalithic builders were capable of doing. And this site is called Sacsayhuaman or Sacsayhuma, located above Cusco. And above here, you can see the Inca repair work. Again, it hasn't been repaired in modern times, so this is what the Inca did. They filled in the gaps of the big stones that fell down. And whoever these builders were, they also incorporated the shapes of animals into the construction of the wall. So you see, this is the forearm, this is the paw, and those are the toes of a puma. There's also a snake design and a llama design and a fish design. I think that was done on purpose. And to me, that would be a very human thing to do. I entertain the idea that these were ancient aliens, but they could have been advanced ancient humans too. I'm open to both. Now, this is a royal palace located in the Sacred Valley of Peru from the 16th century AD. So if the Inca were capable of doing megalithic construction, the royal palace would be megalithic. But you can see it's all adobe mud. So again, that shows you that the Inca were not capable of doing advanced technological work. This was more or less the best craftsmanship that they had with their Bronze Age technology. And now we're at another site called Ollantaytambo. And this is an Inca construction, the whole thing. You can see relatively rough. It's what's called a colca, which is a storage place for drying potatoes and corn. So the right and left sides of the building were left open so that the wind could run through and dry the food as it was being stacked on different levels. It had a thatched roof. And on the other side of the valley, we have this. So these are 6 blocks. This is the biggest one that weighs about 70 tons. If you know David Hatcher Childers, he would say 400 tons. But I said, David, how do you know that? And he said, oh, I don't know. So I said, let's measure it. We measured it. And so every cubic foot of stone is 175 pounds. So we were able to calculate, this one's about 70 tons. So there's 6 in a row. And the quarry for the stone is the very top of this mountain across the valley. So how were those stones moved? Probably levitation several thousand years ago. Because one of the High Inca decided that he wanted to replicate what these ancient ones had done. And so he got 1,000 men to go up to the quarry, and there was already a relatively cut stone up there that was about 100 tons. And then he had them all lash themselves to the stone, and they slowly started to guide it down the mountain, and it fell off the side of the cliff, taking them down with him. So then he decided, maybe that's not a good idea. And this is on the side of this same construction. So again, you can see what the Inca did is they tried to get these to fit back together as well as they could, and then used these stones as filler, and then built on top of it. Again, night and day in terms of technology. Then we're at the famous Machu Picchu once again. And the Inca discovered this site. It was a megalithic site. They discovered it probably in the 1400s. And what we're going to see is the megalithic core, which is this small area, about 5% of it was megalithic, and then they built their city around it. They were probably in awe of what they found and decided to make this a major construction site. This mountain in behind is called Huayna Picchu. And there's actually a staircase that goes all the way to the top. And it's all Inca construction. You can see that it looks like it's a face looking upwards. So it's only this little area here, which is what the Inca found, and they decided, let's build a whole city around what the ancient ones did. They were probably, we can't say because they're not around anymore, they were probably in awe of what they found. Like when they found Cusco, it's like, wow, who did this? The first day I was in Cusco, 20 years ago, I couldn't believe it. I've got a history in construction, and you just look at this stuff and you go, we can't do that today. So this is part of the megalithic construction. This is the Sun Temple. And if you look, you can see this wall is not very well done. This is quite immaculate. And then if you look very carefully, you see the top 2 levels are also relatively rough. So this, again, the Inca abandoned this site in the 1530s, and every time I've been there 100 times so far, but every time I would go, I would ask the people who maintain the site, is this original or is this modern? And this is unreconstructed. This is how the Inca left it. And again, with this example, which is one of the best, now it's obvious to you. You see, pretty rough on top and very, very well done. All of the stone is white granite. It all comes from the mountain. But how the megalithic builders cut the stone, we have no idea. And then another building here. This always only had 3 sides to it. No roof, a flat roof in a very rainy area doesn't make any sense. But you can see that this right wall sunk down into the ground by about 2 feet and pulled the site apart. If that had happened during Inca times, the rest of the city would be gone. Because again, it's pretty rough construction. So this tells you that site or this construction predates the Inca. Another site called Saiwite. You can see the well-carved steps going up. And this is snapped in half like it was a piece of styrofoam. So that had to have been an earthquake of like 9 on the Richter scale. And now we move to Bolivia. This is the famous site called Tiwanaku. And it was founded by the Tiwanaku culture about 100 AD, and then they abandoned the site about 1000 AD. But what they found was an ancient megalithic site, just like in Peru. Like these big pillars here, these are original. And what's intriguing if you ever go there is that you see the weathering on the surface of the stone here and there. 13,000 years ago, Lake Titicaca, which is 7 miles away, was right at this level. It's 100 feet higher. So this looks like it's actually water weathering that happened on these vertical constructions. Unfortunately, in the 1980s, the Bolivian government decided to reconstruct the rest of it based on nothing. They just decided, let's fill it in. So they took other buildings apart and put that up. And it's like, UNESCO was not very happy with them. And there are 2 types of stone at Tiwanaku and Puma Punku. They're both the same site. Some people think Puma Punku is separate, but they're the same site. It's just when the Tiwanaku people arrived, they saw these big pillars sticking out, but Puma Punku was buried in mud. They never found it. All they saw was a hill covered in mud. So you have 2 types of stone. You have red sandstone, which comes from a quarry 8 miles up and over a series of mountains. And then the gray andesite, which is this material, comes from a quarry on top of a volcano 55 miles away to the northeast. So how was that stone transported from the top of a dormant volcano down to the lake? Standard academics say that they built reed boats to move the stones, but some of them weigh 130 tons. That's a big boat to make out of reeds. So again, archaeologists always have an answer, but quite often it's a dumb answer. They have to have an answer for everything no matter what, but often it's kind of dumb. Like the same thing, if you may have heard of an engineer called Christopher Dunn. He was on TV shows a lot in the 1980s, especially. And so he took a bronze chisel and a block of granite, and he hit the stone with the chisel, and it caused the chisel to dent with one blow. So the Egyptologists learned about what Chris Dunn was talking about, and their theory was, well, they had 1,000 men lined up with 1,000 chisels, resharpening them. It's like, oh, okay. So the level of craftsmanship at Puma Punku is probably the finest in the world. The surface is here, it's likely 15,000 plus years old. Fortunate for us, a lot of this was buried under mud, so some of the surfaces are still quite crisp, but it's unlike any other construction in the world. There's some sites like Axum in Ethiopia that look similar, but I think this was a one-off. Whoever built this built nothing else. And so this is the most recent excavation, going down about 2.5 feet, by some Russian archaeologists. And when you ask them, why didn't you dig deeper, they said there's nothing there. So this is actually Puma Punku. This is about 10 feet underground. So this could be evidence of a victim of the ancient mud slide or problem that happened, because the Cerro-Capia, which is the volcano where the gray stone came from, we see evidence that maybe 15,000 years ago it exploded and caused nearby Lake Titicaca to create a tsunami that came from the north to the south and buried Puma Punku. So this could be a very, very ancient grave. But that's the level of precision. That's a 2-foot level. You put it against that stone, there's no movement. It fits perfectly. That's all, that's as flat can get. And then all sorts of different shapes. There are like 4 ancient, I call them maker's marks. There's this one, which is like a double lintel on top of that false door. Then there's a false door. Then there's a cross shape. And unfortunately for poor old Puma Punku, as soon as the Spanish arrived in the 1500s, they started taking Tiwanaku apart, and they found Puma Punku and dug into it, and they took 90% of the stone to the nearby town that they were forming and used the megalithic blocks as foundations for houses. So that's too bad. And then in the late 1800s, they put a railway through from Lake Titicaca to the city of La Paz, and they blew the rest of the site up with dynamite to make fill for the railway bed. So that's why only 5 or 10% is left, and there's no way to reconstruct it when you only have 5 or 10% of an example surviving. Also, there are magnetic anomalies there. The red sandstone is neutral to a compass, but the gray andesite is very sensitive to it. So if you take, with one of the H blocks, take a compass and shove it down through the center of the upper notch area, the needle will move 270 degrees. And then you pull it back out and it goes back to where it originally was. So very energized. It's unknown whether that energy was part of the stone itself or whether that was part of the way the stone was moved or even cut. But it's an anomaly there, which is really interesting. And then the Sungate, which is located at Tiwanaku, that was originally an 11-ton block of the gray andesite. And it's broken, you can see here, and that's a very ancient break. This is one of the first drawings ever made. It was found actually lying face down by the Spanish, and they raised it back up again. But it's likely that when the Tiwanaku people showed up around 100 AD, it was also lying face down and pulled back up again. So that shows you, again, a very major earthquake of some kind went through the location. And these are the tools archaeologists insist did all the work. Copper and bronze chisels, not only in Peru and Bolivia, but also in Egypt. The material is very soft, as we've already learned. So no, this is the technology the Inca had. This is the technology that the dynastic Egyptians had. But megalithic work was not done using this technology. Now we're moving to Egypt. Now even archaeologists will tell you that the box on the left-hand side is older than the box on the right-hand side. The box on the right-hand side is the size of a human being. And you can see the hieroglyphics on it. This one has no hieroglyphics. The top and the box itself were made from one piece of stone, and the quarry is located at Aswan in the south, which is about 400 miles away. And this is in the Cairo Museum. Again, this has the feeling of humans doing the work, because what happened was there's a circular saw on the top about 6 feet in diameter and one at the bottom about 6 feet in diameter. And the operator was trying to cut the stone, and it started to vibrate. He was pushing it too hard, or she was pushing it too hard to be stable. It became unstable and broke the top of what would be the lid off of that box. Now that's in a very dark corner of the museum because they don't want you to see it. They don't have lights over top looking down at it. So they're trying to hide the evidence, but that doesn't work. Here's an example. You can even see the machine. These are the machining marks of the saw cutting through. And some estimates are that the efficiency of the cutting device doing that is 500 times more efficient than what we have in the 21st century. So this is beyond diamond technology. Where are the machines? They're either being hidden, or whoever did the construction took them with them. And this is the famous schist disc, which is about that big. It's actually made of a stone called metasediment, which is a very fine clay. And through millions of years of pressure, it became very, very, very hard and very resonant. You can see obviously in the middle that this was some kind of rotating device. Some people think that it was used actually to create levitation, to raise the stone up into the air or neutralize the gravity. And when you look at the side profile, the unfortunate thing about it was that it was found broken. So the museum staff tried to repair it here, did a pretty sloppy job. Also notice that these 3 lobes are not located at an angle. If this was a propeller or an impeller, they would be at some kind of angle to push or pull. But since they're flat, this could have been one of many that was used in levitating stone. Is there only one of them? Who knows? There probably found a lot of them. But this amazingly is on display in the museum. You'd think an artifact like that would be hidden away because it suggests advanced technology.
What's the diameter?
It's about that big. Some people think it's that big, but it's quite big. And they keep moving it around the museum so that every time I go there, I have to look for it. And they love to hide it under window or under glass ceiling areas where there's a lot of sunlight coming on, so you can't take a good photograph of it. This is all on purpose. You know, these people on purpose are trying to hide the evidence. So who knows, with the new museum called the Grand Egyptian Museum that is now opening up, I hope there will be thousands of artifacts that they've taken out of the basement and put them on display for us to look at. And here we're going to see some vases, dishes, cylindrical jars, and vases with handles made of porphyry, which is a very hard type of granite, basalt, diorite, which is a type of granite as well. And they say they're from the Archaic period. That's pre-dynastic. So they're admitting these things are pre-dynastic. And that's the level of craftsmanship. These had to have been turned on lathes. Now, the concept of the potter's wheel came to Egypt about 1500 to 2000 BC, and some estimates are that these are at least 15,000 years old. So the lathe concept existed in Egypt before the idea of the potter's wheel. And there's some other ones with handles that stick out. Those could not be turned on a lathe, because when the lathe is rotating, you put the tool, it snaps the pieces off. So that suggests more of what's called a CNC machine, which is a computer-controlled cutting device that goes in and does the cutting as the piece is rotated. That's 21st century technology. And it's not like they found 5 or 10 of them. They found 40,000 of them buried under the step pyramid at Saqqara. They're still Now they've opened up underneath. You can go down there and still find stacks of pieces of these all over the place. It's really quite amazing. So here again, very, very fine example. Super hard stone, at least 7 out of 10. There are even examples they found of corundum, which is 9 out of 10. So you'd need a minimum of diamond technology to be able to cut that stone. Also evidence of ancient drill holes or core drills. Now some people say, well, this could be modern, but if you look at the patina, which is the discoloring, that is thousands of years old, that discoloration like that. So that's in one of these giant boxes that they call sarcophagi, but I don't think they were sarcophagi. Much too big for a human being, like 10 to 12 feet long. And of course, the Great Pyramid. 2.3 to 2.5 million blocks of limestone, each one a different shape and size. And most people think that the majority of the limestone comes from the Giza Plateau, but in fact, recent studies of the stone suggest that the majority of the limestone for the Great Pyramid came from Cairo. That means every stone had to be cut, moved down to the Nile, crossed over the Nile, moved up onto the Giza Plateau. And averaging 2 to 3 tons, some of the stones of the Great Pyramid are 40 tons, and some of the granite inside, 80 tons. And the granite comes again from Aswan, which is 400 miles away. Also, the Egyptians did not have, there are no native trees that grow in Egypt that you can use to build boats out of. So the only great forests were in Lebanon, the great cedars of Lebanon. Also, the Great Pyramid is 8-sided. You can see this at the equinoxes each year. So that makes it even more difficult a construction, not just a 4-sided structure, a 4-sided structure with angles going into the center. And the Menkaure pyramid, which is the 3rd pyramid, also has that distinction to it as well. So Great Pyramid is more complex than what most people realize, almost 500 feet tall. And then the casing stone, thankfully there's a little bit of it left here. That's pure calcium carbonate. That comes from one quarry in Cairo. And it's pure calcium carbonate, whereas the stone of the bulk of the pyramid has all sorts of salts and minerals in it. So one theory, of course, is that these were giant energetic structures. And so the center of the pyramid would be the vibratory energetic part, and then the pure limestone acted as an external insulator. So the energy would be created inside the pyramid. Some people think from underwater channels running underwater through the pyramid. And it's locked into the Giza Plateau. It doesn't sit on the plateau, it's locked into it. So again, that's, pretty complex stuff. And underneath Giza, there are lots of tunnels and shafts. This, almost all of them, of course, are locked. But I had the fortunate experience one time when I went, my friend Yusuf Aouyan, who's my guide, who's a local person, our group had left to go home. So I had one more day on the plateau, and I just told him in the morning, I think I'll go up there, and he said, oh, I'll go with you. And he's a real trickster, this guy. It's great. So we went up there. He literally was born and grew up across the street from the Sphinx. So his family lineage in the area goes back a long time. And so we went to an area which was out of bounds, technically, and stepped over a rope and went up to this little building, and one of the guards came out, recognized him, made us some tea. So we sat down and had a cup of tea, and then we walked out to the other end of the building. These guys didn't care because they worship Yusuf. And so then he started to go down this ramp, and we started to go underground. And we went into the Giza Plateau 5 stories underground. And it goes much, much deeper than that. So we were walking around through this complex, and he said, "Do you want to keep going?" And I looked at my watch and I said, "It's almost 4 o'clock. I think we better go." So, but there's there's at least 15 stories of tunnels underneath the Giza Plateau.
Who built it?
Whoever did the megalithic work did it.
What tools? Egyptian?
No, pre-dynastic.
What did they say? The Egyptologists in Egypt. What was used?
Sorry?
Egyptologists in Egypt. What are they saying?
Well, all of this area is locked up, so they don't even recognize that there is a complex underground. This is part of the...
Was these Bronze Age tools used?
Yeah, exactly. But that's why Egypt, all of these countries, there's so much cover at this one going on. Egypt the longest than anywhere, but Egypt is the only country where the archaeological sites, they're starting to open up stuff that was before prohibited, which we'll see later on. Like every year when I go, there's another site that was completely only for academics that now you can have access to if you pay $3,000 for 2 hours. Well, actually, their new director's very smart. He's got a very Western mind. The previous guy, who was called Zahi Hawass, nobody got access to anything. And so even if you wanted to do excavation, you had to go directly to him, not his office, but to him, to get the paper. And then what he would do is he would say, okay, you have access to this site to do excavation for 2 weeks. And then as soon as you find something, you have to tell me. And so these people, a lot of them were foreign archaeologists, so of course they had to obey the rules. So as soon as they would find something, especially if it was jewelry, they would have to phone him up and say, yeah, we found something. He would arrive with 2 briefcases, open them up, and take all of it and put it in the briefcases and leave with it. And then Mubarak, who used to be the president, his wife was connected with the airport, and so all of that was put into diplomatic satchels and sent to Zurich. And there it was all sold on the black market. So Egyptians say, do not take ancient artifacts out of our country because it's illegal. That's because they cornered the market on it. So luckily he's been kicked out. But yeah, the new guy was very smart. He thought, well, these places are off limits to the common people, but if we charge $3,000 for 2 hours, then we'll open them up for you. This is an example of this is a tiny part of the complex of shafts and tunnels under the plateau. It's all the way around the whole thing. And this one, so there are 2 life-size people, that's probably 20 feet across and 20 feet this way, and goes down at the moment about 50 feet where it's all sand. But if you imagine that these are maybe 12,000 to 15,000 years old, that gives lots of time for the sand to build up. And there are lots of them like that. They go down, some of them are much deeper that you can still look into. They go down and there are horizontal tunnels that go through. Some say going as far as Karnak, which is like 200 miles away. So it's not that the majority of ancient Egypt is buried in the sand. It was built on purpose underground. For what reason, nobody knows. Here's an example of a horizontal saw mark in basalt, which is about 7 out of 10 in terms of hardness. So they've done recent tests where they take a copper saw and some sand, and they sprinkle it on top of the stone and they try to saw it. And after like 2 days, they made it down maybe 1/4 to 1/2 inch. Because the sand is silica, the same hardness as the stone. The tool has to be harder than the material. But this shows evidence here and in other examples where the penetration rate or the feed rate of cutting was 1 millimeter per cut, or a millimeter per revolution. That again is 500 times more, not faster, but more efficient than what we have. So, this is beyond our level of technology. Then this is inside the Great Pyramid. The Grand Gallery. Then we have the obelisks. The obelisks are made out of one piece of granite. They're not pieces put together. And so one of the theories is that the Great Pyramid and the other two pyramids were energy generators, and the function of the obelisk was as the receiver, like Wi-Fi. So an energetic field is created inside the Great Pyramid and is sent out and goes to the obelisk. The obelisks were not like randomly located. They were always in a series of 2. At Karnak, there were a series of 12 of them, 6 rows of them going down. Now that's like an energetic grid. So that's what I think they were. And the reason why you had to have one piece of stone is that it had to resonate. If you had a bunch of different pieces of stone with filler, it's going to make a thud sound. The largest one still intact is at Karnak. It's 450 tons. And the stone was moved somehow from the Aswan quarry at the southern point of Egypt. Then the Great Sphinx. Originally, the head was exposed, but it's called a yardang. It was just like a blob, and the rest of it was solid bedrock. And so whoever did the work on the Sphinx, didn't take tools and start chipping away to expose the Sphinx. They cut these blocks out and moved them and set them in front to create the Sphinx temple. Some of them are 40, 50, 60 tons. And if you look at the amount of weathering, that's much more weathering than, say, 2,000 or 3,000 years. So it's quite probable that the Sphinx could be the oldest part of the plateau. Some people think it's 13,000 years old. Some people think it's 39,000 years old. And the weathering again. We know the head has been recarved at least once, if not twice, because you see the weathering on the front of the stone here, or of the Sphinx here, is much more than the face. So the face had to have been recarved at least once, if not twice or more, during dynastic times. And this is the Sphinx enclosure. You see horizontal weathering, but you also see vertical weathering. And it was Robert Schoch again. He was shown a photograph of that by a man called John Anthony West. And then he was asked, what is it? And he said, the vertical is water. And then he was shown a photograph of the Sphinx. And he had nothing to say, because that blew history out of the water automatically. So far, at least 200 geologists around the world reinforced Dr. Schoch's theory that the vertical is water erosion, minimum 12,000 years old. So standard story Sphinx made by Khafre or Khufu in the 4th dynasty, say 4,000 years ago. This shows it's at least 12,000 years old. That's scientific proof. And in between the two paws, you see these wooden planks? In between, there's a rectangular area, and I asked our guide, who actually happened to be this guy, I said, what's that for? And he said, that's how you get access to the Hall of Records. So in the 1980s, they had major equipment go up because Robert Schoch found a hollow space underneath the left-hand side of the left paw, a depression. And the Egyptian authorities didn't want to know about it. So when they found about that, they took heavy-duty machinery up and they cut into the area in between the paws and found that it was hollow. And they found the Hall of Records. What happened to all the artifacts? Gone. So it does exist. Then near the left-hand back side of the Sphinx, this piece of wood comes out. And when you take it away, there's a ladder inside of it. So the Sphinx is hollow. And what they did was an archaeologist called Mark Lehner, who's an American. What happened was one of the blocks fell out, exposing the hollow part of the Sphinx. So he automatically took like a circus-sized tent and put it in front of that area. And then he went inside the Sphinx and explored it for 3 weeks, every day. And when he came out, he gave a press conference. And the journalist asked him, "What did you find?" And he said, "Nothing." In 3 weeks? So it's quite likely that there's a tunnel inside at the bottom of the Sphinx that interconnects with the tunnel system of the Giza Plateau as well. See, you're seeing proof of this stuff. Then we have the Bent Pyramid, located at Dashur. There are 3 pyramids there: the Bent Pyramid, the Red Pyramid, and the Black Pyramid. And they all say that they were done by one pharaoh who was displeased with the first one and the second one. So in order to make his tomb, they had to build 3 of them. Now the Black Pyramid is made of mud bricks, so it's falling apart. So that was made during dynastic times. They also say the reason why the Bent Pyramid is bent is because they built it halfway up and then discovered that the angle was wrong. So they had to change the angle. Nobody's that stupid. You make a drawing on the ground with your finger and go, what should the angle of the pyramid be? So the other theory from oral tradition says that this pyramid, its name was Seneferu, which means double harmony, which suggests it had a double vibration to it. One for one angle, one for the other angle. And this is the Red Pyramid. You can see all the casing stone is completely destroyed. I don't think that the blocks were taken out. That's, it's a great mystery as to what happened. They say with the Great Pyramid, all the casing stone was taken to Cairo to build the new city of Cairo during the early Islamic times, which is possible. But what happened to this one? There is possibly the idea that there was a major cataclysmic explosion or earthquake of some kind on the Giza Plateau that caused the casing stone to literally blow off. And that's why all you find are broken little bits. Because you wouldn't take a big casing stone block and break it up into little bits to move it to Cairo. You'd move the block to Cairo. And this is inside of the Red Pyramid. The harmonics inside are incredible. It resonates to ohm. Just like the King's Chamber in the Great Pyramid resonates to ohm. They all resonate to ohm, or octaves higher and lower. And if you go low enough down, that is the vibration of our planet. Ohm at several octaves down. Now, some of you may have heard of this site. It's called the Serapeum, and it's underground at Saqqara. It's a series of 2 tunnels. And inside those tunnels, you find 25 niches, or cut-in areas. And in 23 of them are these giant boxes. 23 of the boxes are intact. And this one, that's the box. The lid is actually back this way. So what it's suggesting is that these stone blocks were roughed out either on the surface or inside the tunnel, and then moved to where the niche was to be. The box was set into its niche, and then the lid came behind, and then the lid had to be put on top of the box, marked, taken back off the box, and then shaped in order to fit perfectly, because they would almost be hermetically sealed, like perfect seals on them. So this one never made it to its niche, again suggesting a major disturbance, like a cataclysm happened, causing work to suddenly stop, which we saw in Peru as well and throughout Egypt. And this is one of the big ones. That one's 100 tons. And notice the hieroglyphs. Hieroglyphs are really badly done. Standard academics say the hieroglyphs in the box are contemporary with one done at the same time. And this is my teacher, Stephen Mailer, and look at the high level of polish. Like that is like glass-like. And that's what the hieroglyphs look like. That's like an 8-year-old with a nail as compared to the precision of the boxes. Also, there's only space on either side of the hallway and the corner, 1 foot on either side, to turn the box around the corner and move it. And at 70 tons, you would need a crane, which you can't fit inside the Serapeum in order to maneuver them. So that's a great mystery. All the lids were found ajar on all but one. And so Mariette, who was a French archaeologist, when he found the one that was intact, he took gunpowder and they blew up one end of it because he thought he would find something inside. And it was hollow. So what do I think they're for?
What's your theory on what they used it for?
Well, different people have different theories. My theory is that the original builders were not from here. So they needed, as a way to regenerate their energy, they built the boxes in place, and they would go in the box. Once they were re-energized, they could come back out of the box in order to continue their work. Some say it was for seed storage, but the main thing is, how the hell were these things made? So they're, again, really, they couldn't even make a straight line. So this is dynastic work, with bronze, maybe meteorite, iron tools in order to scrape maybe 1 millimeter into the stone. Also, the stone is granite, so it's heterogeneous, which means it has all sorts of different material in it. So some areas are soft, some areas are harder. That's inside one of the boxes. Again, it responds to ohm. And just a little detail is that the corners are not sharp 90-degree angles. They've got a slight curve to them. So that, again, is an incredible level of technology. And then at Dendera, we have what probably is the world's oldest zodiac. Quite possibly 11,600 years ago is when it was made. And some believe the reasoning behind why the zodiac was made was not a fascination with the heavens, a fear of the heavens, because of the cataclysmic events that happened, that they had to look at the sky because they didn't know when it was going to come back again. Now we know it's every 13,000 years, but they didn't know. So the full zodiac is located there, and there's a lady called Patricia Awian who lives in Egypt, and she has decoded this thing like very beautifully. So it's just one of those anomalies. The original one was found by Napoleon, and they took it off the ceiling and took it to Paris. It's in the Louvre. Then they made a copy for the Egyptians. Yeah, well, much like the history of Egypt, so much stuff is, literally stolen from Egypt. Or officials being bought off. I just want to give one more example. At Karnak, there were 2 giant obelisks. One of them was taken down and moved to France. It's in the Place de Concorde. When the French were able to move it, then they went back to Egypt and said, we've come for the other one. And the officials said, forget it. You didn't pay us for the first one. So that's the only reason the other one's still there. Sorry.
What was the hieroglyphic inscription on the box?
Yeah.
Sorry?
What was the hieroglyphic inscription on the box? How does it read?
I don't read hieroglyphs. But what I can tell you is that there are a number of cartouches on it that have nothing in them. A cartouche is supposed to have the name of somebody in it. So the fact that it didn't have a cartouche or the name of a person inside lends the suggestion that during dynastic times, the boxes were up for sale. Do you want your cartouche on the box? Do you want to be put in the box? It'll cost you this much.
Where did they get the idea that there were apis bulls put in those boxes?
Well, that's the theory. The name Serapeum comes from it's a type of ancient bull that was worshipped by the dynastic people. So they say that there were bull mummies found inside all the boxes, but there's no evidence of any of the mummies anymore. One supposedly was found inside the Serapeum that was taken to the Museum of Agriculture. But when a friend of mine who lives in Egypt went and talked to the director, he said, I'd like to see the mummified bull of the Serapis bull. The director said, what mummy are you talking? There are no mummies of those. So that's where the name comes from, but obviously it's a much more complex story than that. Then the famous helicopter, tank, plane, or submarine. Now, what most academics say is these are what's called palimpsests, and that means that it's a hieroglyph carved into a hieroglyph. So Ramses II, who was the most famous of the pharaohs, when he inherited all of his father's sites, he decided that he wanted his name cut into the stone much, much deeper than all the other hieroglyphs so that nobody could obliterate his name, because he couldn't cut it in deeper. But to me, they look like a helicopter and a tank and a spaceship. But who knows? Then this is the Osirion, located at Abydos. That block I'm standing next to weighs about 45 tons. Came from the quarry in the deep south at Aswan. This was built on purpose underground. Next to it is what's called Seti Temple, the first building. It was built on top, but this is built on purpose underground. And if you look at the scale of these things, monumental. And there's my hand for scale. That's a giant core drill hole. You can see where the penetration of the drill was at this end like that. So that's like that in diameter. As far as I know, we don't have core drills that big. Even in mining, they don't come that big. They're pretty big. But that thing is huge. And is another example of very ancient advanced technology.
I wonder what they powered it.
Sorry?
I wonder what they powered it with.
That's the question. Something like that would have to have huge horsepower and be guided. It would have to be a drill press. It couldn't be like somebody holding a drill and plowing it in. But hundreds and hundreds of these, different sizes. Most of them are at Karnak. Then we have this other anomaly here. This was part of an ancient stone structure where the stone has recrystallized. So you can see all the cracks in the surface and stuff like that. It's a type of granite. Granite does not decompose like that. So when we look at a profile, you see how fine the crystalline structure is on the surface, but then inside it's much rougher. So our geologist Susan Moore believes that that site was hit by probably 2,000 degrees Celsius, like a blast of heat that caused all of the stone to expand and then crack. And literally you can peel, they don't let you do it, but you can peel pieces of that off. But at Karnak, the center of Karnak is megalithic that goes right down what's called the Holy of Holies. That's the megalithic part. When the dynastic people found it, they built the rest of the complex, which is one of the biggest temples on earth around. They always build around the megalithic center in Peru, in Egypt, etc. And here too, the weathering on this granite, that's not normal weathering of granite, again suggesting a heat blast. Quite possibly, as Robert Schoch says, from the sun, maybe at sunrise, on the western, from the east, hitting the western surfaces and making the surface like blow off. And this is down through the center of what's called the Holy of Holies. So the megalithic is on the right and left-hand side, made out of very hard stone. All the rest of the construction of the temple is sandstone or limestone, which is dynastic material, much softer and much more recent. Then there are all these giant statues that they found as well during the time of Ramses II. This is near Luxor, and some of these are 30 feet tall, made out of one piece of stone. So what happened was during Ramses' time, they were doing excavations in the area, and they found these giant statues buried underground. So they would go to him and say, "Do you want your name on it?" And he said, "Sure." So this is Ramses II's cartouche. But one thing to notice is you see this dagger coming down at an angle. So if this was all done at the same time, the cartouche would have been in the center. They would have made the dagger a little bit off so they didn't overlap. So that shows you recarving. And they're still finding them to this day. And the precision of the cutting of the stone is technically perfect. The right hand and the left hand side are exactly the same. A human sculptor does not shape a face perfectly, left and right. This requires at least diamond level technology to make it bilaterally symmetrical. That's another thing that Chris Dunn did, is he took a piece of like wax paper to a photograph of one of the faces, and he sketched out the right side and the left side, and then turned it over, and they perfectly matched. That's high tech. That's not human. That's high technology being able to do that. Then the Colossi of Memnon. That is a seated statue, originally one piece of stone, is 720 tons on a 300-ton base. The quarry is in Cairo, which is 400 miles away. This is not next to the Nile. And again, no indigenous trees grow in the area where you could make some kind of rollers to be able to move them around. And then another curious thing is the front is facing east. That's the western surface. It's the most heavily damaged. The sides, lesser damage. The back, no damage. So again, suggesting a pulse of energy from the sun happening at sunrise, hitting the colossi. And then that's a 1,000-ton statue that was a kneeling figure that fell over. So that again is from the Aswan quarry. 1,000 tons. Originally, the stone would have been at least 1,500 or 2,000 tons before it was carved. So how the hell did they move that? Then the Valley of the Queens. This is one of many of the underground tunnels or funeral places cut into the limestone bedrock. But there's no way that this was done by hand. Again, it's about 8 feet wide, so that means you would have 3 people with hand tools cutting away at it. How many centuries would that take to make one? Not to mention the multiple ones that are located in there. And again, on one occasion, I and a couple of others were allowed to go, this is the Valley of the Queens, we were allowed to go underground into the tunnel system. And our guide, who opened the door, unlocked the door for us, he said the Valley of the Kings and the Valley of the Queens are linked together by underground tunnel systems. So just again, the sense of scale, the amount of work it would have taken to do this kind of stuff. Then Elephantine Island, which is at Aswan. I call this the telephone box. That's kind of what it looks like. Wasn't completely finished, but you can see the drill holes where there would have been doors made for it. Again, a block of granite from the area, originally probably 500 to 800 tons. Never completed. You can see it's not perfectly polished. So it was being made quite possibly, again, in megalithic times, and then construction was disturbed by some kind of cataclysmic event. There's another one off to the right, which is more of a black granite, which is broken into pieces because the dynastic people, when they found that one, they broke it and recycled the stone. Luckily for us, they never got around to cutting this one up into pieces. And that's the unfinished obelisk. 1,200 tons. at Aswan. And the story, they say, again, what they do is they have stone pounders that located all over the place here. They say the way this was shaped was with stones pounding away on the stone and then pounding away to make the channel on the left side and the right side. No. Also, how the hell would you get it out of there? It's not a flat landscape. You'd have to be able to lift this thing out, and it's a very hilly area, so it's not like you're pulling it out of a hole and moving it onto a ship that they couldn't construct and put it onto a barge. So again, it's an incredible mystery. The reason why they stopped working on it was they made it down this far and they found a horizontal crack there. So that told whoever it was that was cutting it, we can't use this because it won't resonate. The crack would cause it to be flawed. So they didn't decide to cut it into pieces and take some of the pieces away to make other things. They just walked away from it. This is a smaller one. You see what clearly looked like machining or tooling marks, trying to release this smaller obelisk. It's about 20 feet long. Then this site is called Tanis. It's located very far north of Egypt in the Nile Delta. And you can see no plants grow at Tanis. It looks like it blew up. Literally, like an explosion came and blew the whole thing. Because you see the green fields around it, but Tanis itself is devoid of life, and walking around there is like walking on the moon. You're not walking on dirt, you're walking on powder. So there's no mineral content left in that material. Then you see two different types of hieroglyphs. These are rough hieroglyphs, or shallow, done by the dynastics. These were done by machines, because you can put your hands and fingers in there, and you just feel it, and you can tell this was done by a router of some kind, not by hand. It's like 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch deep. That's maybe 1 millimeter, 2 millimeters deep. So the other curious possibility is that the dynastic people may have also inherited the hieroglyphic language. They didn't invent it, they found it and reinterpreted it. Then we see more evidence of heat on this statue. Again, probably around 2,000 degrees Celsius. The dynastic people find the location and decide to recycle the material and build walls. This is quartzite, which is very high in quartz mineral content. It's like a creamy color. You can see it's turned red. It's been burnt by high heat. And that foot, that's the foot of what once was a one-piece statue, 50 to 75 feet tall, made of one piece of stone. And a couple of friends of mine, ladies, the first time we went there, they found out the location of where the rest of the statue is. So they started to walk to where it was. A guy with a machine gun came up to them and said, "Turn around." The site is guarded by police and military with machine guns at all times. You're not allowed to wander where you want it at Tanis. It's like, you've got like 2 acres to look at. The rest of it's off limits. Again, look at the size of that giant slab. Again, quartzite's interesting because if you heat quartzite, it melts. Granite will explode if you apply heat to it, but quartzite melts. You can see the melting of the surface, again, at least 2,000 degrees Celsius. All of the other megalithic aspects blown to pieces. And again there, and finally, I guess all I have time for now is, this is called the Osiris Shaft. This is one of the places you can go for $3,000. It's only been open for about 4 years. But before this, nobody was allowed in here. So this is the first level. You're entering the Giza Plateau itself, underground. This is the top level. That's looking up. Of course, all the grates, sealing all these things off so you're not allowed to even look down into them. And then that's the first level going down. That's about 30 feet. And when you go down the ladder, that's my wife going down the ladder. Then you reach the first level. That's like 12 feet by 100 feet. Then that's the ladder going down to the second level. Luckily, they replaced the ladders because they were getting pretty bad. But you go down to the second level and you enter a room that has these two boxes that literally look like they exploded from the inside out. That there was some kind of reaction that happened. You see all the discoloration of, again, what looks like high heat emanating from there. This is another box. It's made of a material or stone called dacite that it comes from Turkey. So that's not a local stone. Let's see inside. It looks like, again, like it blew up. And level number 3. It's going down 50 feet to where the water table is. And in the water is a 40-ton stone box that my friend Yusuf is standing on. And there are tunnels that go through that site that probably connect up with the Sphinx tunnel. They've been blocked off. But that's one of the newer ones to be able to access. And then if just like a couple of minutes here, we're in Lebanon, Baalbek. That's the quarry, limestone. That's a 1,000-ton block of stone that was actually cut from the quarry and fell down. The Romans came later and cut pieces out of it. They were smart, at least they recycled it. But also located there is this one. That's 1,200 tons, still attached to the bedrock. Never moved to the actual Baalbek site. That's what the surface looks like. Next to it, Russians recently excavated this one, 1,600 tons.
Was it fully cut out?
No, it's still attached.
Oh, okay.
This one's still attached. Recently, they dug down this way, so you can see where it's still attached. But I think I'm running out of time. That just shows you how big this stuff is. And finally, I suppose, this is what's called the trilithon. Those are 3 blocks, 1,000 tons each, in the Baalbek complex, fitting together perfectly. On top of that, you have the Roman area or era construction, and above that was a medieval fortress. So astonishing craftsmanship, not too good, really bad. Well worth going. I wouldn't go now because they're blowing it up, but eventually. And another wall in Baalbek, 800-ton blocks. And then look at the sense of scale. These are people. That's how big it is.